As you descend the stone steps leading into the Blair Street Vaults, the light slowly disappears with each step you take. The smell of musky dampness fills the air with each inhale as the darkness slowly closes in around you. In the distance, the dim flicker of a single candle dances against the wall, casting shadows that almost look human. As you hear the echo of the steel door from the top of the stairs slam shut behind you, the darkness that surrounds you takes over, and you need a minute for your eyes to adjust. You are now consumed by the vaults that sit below Edinburgh's South Bridge. Hidden away from the bustling city above, the tales and events that took place here over 200 years ago can still be felt lingering in the cold air that bounces off the cold stone walls and rubble scattered in the corners of each vaulted room. Hundreds of stories emerge from people who have visited Edinburgh's vaults over the years. From the sounds of disembodied voices tormenting tour groups to the feeling of an icy cold finger touching your arm, Edinburgh is full of haunted sights and stories, and the Blair Street Vaults are no exception. People have reported hearing heavy footsteps coming from empty rooms or seeing the dark shadow of a man standing in a doorway. A cold, angry voice says, "Get out," in the most threatening tone. Mr. Boots, the Watcher, has had enough of you invading his space, letting you know it's time to leave. It would be terrifying to walk through the labyrinth of chambers lit only by candlelight by yourself. Luckily, you aren't alone because you're spending the evening with an expert storyteller that knows every corner of the vaults and the history that comes with it. There are several vaults located under Edinburgh's South Bridge, but today's tale comes to you from the Blair Street Vaults. These vaults, which you can visit, are very haunted. The vaults were built under Edinburgh's South Bridge in the late 1700s to provide storage to nearby merchants and tradesmen. However, the vaulted rooms had many issues and were prone to leaking during rainy weather. Scotland is known for being particularly rainy, so the leaking almost seemed to be constant. This caused the vaults to become damp and gloomy, often damaging the merchants' stored items. This wasn't ideal, and it caused the merchants to move out, leaving the vaults abandoned, which is when criminals started to move in. The vaults are filled with a dark history of crime, body snatching, and illegal whiskey distilling. The vaults were home to criminals and people with nowhere else to turn. The dark atmosphere from the crime-filled days still lingers heavily in the air as you walk through the vaults today. So the vaults quickly filled up with bootleggers, thieves, body snatchers, and people who could not afford to live elsewhere. It was also home to a few businesses, including a tavern that served oysters and alcohol, and a cobbler that fixed shoes. People lived and died in the vaults, and all sorts of shady business occurred throughout the years. Rumor has it that the infamous Burke and Hare were said to also store bodies in the vaults before bringing their victim to Dr. Knox for dissection. Not only were the vaults filled with criminals, they were unpleasant to anyone who stepped inside. The vaults were dank and damp from the leaks, and they were cold as the walls and the floors were made from stone. In addition, rats would often run rampant throughout the pathways between vaults, and the air was filled with the musty and disgusting stench of fish oil and sewage. Fish oil was a cheap and effective way to provide light in the dark vaults, and as plumbing wasn't a thing back in those days, people in Edinburgh would fill buckets to the brim with waste each day and dump the sewage in the streets in the evening so it could make its way to the nearby loch. It certainly wasn't the most pleasant place to hang out in Edinburgh. With tales of crime come stories of the paranormal. Who knows what other horrible things happened in the vaults during the 1800s? The vaults were eventually sealed over until they were rediscovered in the 1980s. Tour companies moved in, ready to tell everyone about the history that once took place in the historic underground vaults. Over the years, stories of ghostly events that happened to staff and guests started to emerge. Creepy stories often pop up from people who go on tours of the vaults, including accounts where people feel chills, general uneasiness, or experience body pains, which turn into human-like scratches appearing on random parts of their bodies. In addition, people have experienced hearing disembodied voices, heavy breathing, footsteps, and shadowy figures. The Blair Street Vaults are definitely haunted, and are home to multiple ghosts, including the spirit of a child named Jack, who often plays tricks and games on tour groups. Guests and staff have heard Jack's little rubber ball rolling across the stone floors, bouncing off the walls, followed by the faint giggling of a small child. Another ghost that is often spotted in the vaults is the friendly cobbler. He lives in the same vault as little Jack and is said to be protective of the ghostly child. Perhaps he is the cobbler that spent his days in the vaults fixing shoes while he was alive and is stuck around to continue fixing shoes in the afterlife. However, there is one terrifying and sinister entity that haunts the Blair Street Vaults in Edinburgh. He is known as Mr. Boots, or the Watcher. Mr. Boots wanders around the vaults, including some local pubs built directly into the vaults. When Mr. Boots is around, heavy footsteps can be heard, and often a large, imposing, shadowy figure is spotted standing in nearby doorways. Those who have seen Mr. Boots have described him as a tall man wearing a dirty blue coat and heavy, worn-out leather boots. He is said to make his rounds, keeping a close eye on anyone visiting his vaults. He watches everything and is incredibly protective of the vaults, and he lets you know when he is tired of people invading his space. Staff and guests have felt their hair being pulled, feel like someone has pushed them, or felt icy fingers touching their arms, only to find scratches appear later in the evening. One evening, as the tour was walking through the vaults, Mr. Boots had enough, and guests claimed to hear an angry growl that sounded like someone saying "get out" to several different people, warning them to exit the space as quickly as possible. During his life, was Mr. Boots someone who lived in the vaults? And why is he so protective over the vaults? He is said to be incredibly aggressive, not only to visitors of the vaults, but also to other ghosts in the area. Perhaps he has a secret hidden down deep in the vaults that he doesn't want people to discover. Was he one of the people who hid bodies that he dug up from local graveyards? Or did he commit other crimes? While no one knows who he was in real life, staff at Mercat Tours have speculated and have theories about who he was and why he haunts the vaults in the way he does today. One Mercat Tours storyteller theorizes that Mr. Boots was once hired as a watchman, hired to watch merchant goods before the illegal activities started to take over the vaults. As the vaults were all interconnected when they were used as storage, people had to walk through other people's storage units to reach their own, and watchmen were hired to make sure their storage was safe from theft. I've been down to the Blair Street Vaults several times, and every trip is incredibly fun, spooky, and memorable. Unfortunately, I've never run into any of the ghosts that are said to haunt the vaults. The only thing I've experienced in these particular vaults, because I've experienced things in other vaults in Edinburgh, on one tour I noticed that the tour guide looked very uncomfortable. His eyes kept darting to one corner of the vault we were in, and he looked worried. He didn't stray from his storytelling, nor did he alert the group to whatever he was seeing, but I noticed how scared he looked. This was at the start of the tour, and he did relax as the tour went on, but he never mentioned what had spooked him in the start, and unfortunately I didn't get the chance to ask. So who knows? Who knows what he was seeing, but he didn't mention it. I don't know if he just didn't want to scare the tour group or what, but either way, I wish I did. I wish I asked. But anyway, on another tour I went on, the tour guide mentioned that the vaults were especially scary at the end of the night when they must wander back through all of the rooms alone, blowing out each candle one by one, walking through the vaults as they get darker and darker after an evening of telling the spookiest stories of real events that happened in the very rooms they were standing in. Have you ever been on a ghost tour where you visit Edinburgh's haunted vaults? And if you haven't, will you go on one if you ever head to Edinburgh? I highly recommend it. I'm a huge fan of ghost tours. And Edinburgh has loads. They don't just have the Blair Street Vaults. I know that those are the vaults that I'm talking about in this particular podcast. And if you want to hear tales of the other vaults in Edinburgh, I can definitely tell you because I've been to all of them. And they're all very good. They're all very different. It's different stories, different experiences. I absolutely love it. But I'm a huge fan of ghost tours. But let me know if you've been or if you would go. And if you have been, did you visit the Blair Street Vaults? Because I would love to know if you've had any experiences down there, or if anyone in your tour group had experiences. I have had experiences in other vaults where people have fainted. Well, it was one woman who fainted right at the beginning, but that's another story for another time. If you're interested, just let me know. However, if you can't make it down to the vaults, or you're too scared to run into the ghosts that wander the area, you can still experience the vaults in the city. Pubs like the Banshee Labyrinth are built within the vaults. You can grab a pint and sit in one of the vaulted rooms listening to live music, chatting with friends, or watching one of the films they put on. It's a way to experience the vaults without the ghost stories. While you won't hear the tales on a ghost tour when you visit the pub, the Banshee Labyrinth and nearby pubs do come with its own ghosts, including our friend Mr. Boots. However, if you encounter him at the pub, you can just leave immediately. So there you go. And that's it. Thank you so much for listening to Everything is Spooky in the Dark, the podcast for Wandering Crystal. Bye.